Harchakot. In the previous year, we studied some laws of Harchakot, distancing, which are observed when intimate relations are forbidden between a woman and her husband. In this year, we will continue to explore the other subject of Harchakot. These are the Harchakot involving beds and benches. Of course, we know there's a din of separating the beds. One of the areas where Harchakot are most necessary is in the bedroom. In order to avoid any possibility of forbidden relations, Chazal forbade close contact between a husband and wife in the bedroom. For this reason, the Gemara in Shabbos states that a man may not sleep in the same bed with his wife when she's a nida, even if both of them are clothed. Says Masechta Shabbos Yud Gimel, Iboilahu nida, Ma'ashu Tishan and Baila. Can his wife sleep with her husband? He bevigda v'hu bevigdo. If they're both closed. The pasuk in Cheskel, El Haharim lo achal ve'enav lo nasa El Gilulei Beis Yisrael. Person didn't eat by the mountains. His eyes didn't look upon Avodah Zarah. He didn't have forbidden relations with the wife of his neighbor. And he did not come close to his wife who was a nida. The same pasuk has a nida and an eshes ish in the same pasuk. Make ish nida le'eshes reyu. Makes a hekesh, makes a connection between the status of his wife as well as the status of Neshes Ish. Ma Eshes Rei Hu B'Vigda V'Hi B'Vigda, just like you may not be in the same bed with a neighbor's wife, an Eshes Ish, even if both are clothed, Aser. Av Ishto Nida Hu B'Vigda V'Hi B'Vigda Aser. Shulchan Aruch accepts this ruling as the halacha. The Ramah expands it to a case where the husband and wife are lying on two separate beds that touch each other. And this is the source, Ramah, for the halacha of separating the beds. Shulchan Aruch says, Lo yishan ima b'mita, afilu kol echad b'vigdo, ve'enogin zeh b'zeh. They cannot be in the same bed, even if they're clothed. They can't touch each other. That refers to the husband and wife. The Ramah adds, and even if each one has their own individual bedding, and even if they're in two separate beds, but the hamitos nogos zubezu, but the beds touch each other, osir. So for Ashkenazim, based on this Ramah, the husband and wife have to sleep on two separate beds that are not touching each other, that they are separated, and technically that they have their own linens. Because of this prohibition, a married couple should furnish their bedroom with two detached beds, as the halacha requires these beds to be moved apart at times when relations are prohibited. However, the Ramah does not specify the exact distance by which the beds must be separated from each other. According to Rav Ovadia Yosef, even a small space in between the beds suffices. So even a mashu, even just some minimal separation. Also, lishon or lishkav b'mita achas in ishton mita. They may not sleep in one bed. Avu b'shein mita miuchedes lechad mehem. And even though it's not a specific bed that's designated for them, and even if they are clothed and they're not touching each other, even if it's a very wide bed, the king size bed, and even if they're sleeping on their own, beddings, like the sheet. Vadia points out that there's a chumrah of having two separate beds. He's referring to the chumrah of the Ramah. Imamitos no goes as long as they're touching. Ulam im hifridu es amitos zubezu. If you have two separate beds and you've separated the two beds a little bit, yesh revach beneim kol shuhu. That's the point we just brought up. As long as there's a kol shuhu separation, yesh lahakel, you can be lenient. However, a machmer laniach revach gadol ben amitos hechad efshar tavolov bracha. Someone who keeps a significant distance between the beds, so that's a praiseworthy thing. But Meikra Din, as long as there's some separation, you've met the strict halacha. And this is also the opinion of the Makor Chaim, cited in the Pischei Tshuva, that the two beds must not be touching. I am to say from Makor Chaim, this is the Pischei Tshuva, Ha'olam noagim kestimas loshen ramah, that the world Firzach, the Ashkenazic world, follows the Ramah. That even if you have two beds, if the beds touch each other, it's prohibited. As long as there's a minimal separation between the two beds, it'll be permitted. On the other hand, some poskim, such as Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, require a greater distance between the beds, minimally, so that the sheets and blankets from the two beds do not touch. So that's a different gather. That should be a separation so that the bedwear of the two beds are separated. And ideally with sufficient distance that the husband and wife cannot touch each other unintentionally while sleeping. Someone yawns or stretches, they should not be able to touch each other. He says, you should separate the beds so that the bed covers don't touch each other. You should separate the beds enough so that there wouldn't be any inadvertent touching by husband and wife. So it should be an arm's length distance. It's another geder. So is it permitted to use two beds that are separated but have the same headboard? According to Rav Shmuel Vosner, Shevet HaLevi, so long as the beds themselves are separated, it is permitted for the beds to remain attached to the same headboard. Nevertheless, he recommends being stringent if possible, presumably because it maintains a sense of connection between the husband and wife to be connected by the same headboard. Hamito she'oisim nifradot, beds that are separate, v'rak harosh mechabram, there's a headboard, vaday lahalacha shari. He says Meikra Adin is permitted, kivan shenifradot, because the beds are separated. He says it's an eitzah, you shouldn't do it. Zumidas chasidus ba'alma, but that's a chasid. It's lifnim mishuras adin. It's not meikra adin. It's going beyond the din. The royally imana, you should prevent doing so. Now, using the bed of one's spouse. Another aspect of harchakot pertaining to the bedroom involves the husband and wife sitting or lying on the bed of the other during the nida period. The Shulchan Aruch forbids a man from even sitting on his wife's bed when she's in nida, presumably due to the concern of inappropriate thoughts. Hear her. Lo yeshe b'mita miuchedes la, afilu shelo b'fanah. Even if she's not in the room, you should not sit on your wife's bed during the nida period. The Pischei Tshuva writes that if the wife is not in the city, the husband is permitted to even lie upon the bed to take a nap. Right? Shalom b'fanev pashutim eina be'ir klal mutter. Because the Tshuva says if the wife is out of town, then this prohibition goes away. Does the same prohibition of sitting or lying on the bed of one's spouse apply to the wife as well? That means, can the wife sit or lie on the husband's bed? According to most poskim, including the Taz and the Darchei Tahar, it applies only to a man sitting on his wife's bed. But a woman may sit on her husband's bed. She may not lie on it, but she may sit on it. Says the Darchei Tahar, Lo yeshiv habal al mita miuchedes leisha. Husband shouldn't sit on his wife's designated bed, afilu shalom b'fanah, even if she's not there. Kol shekain she'osur lo lishka b'mitas, and certainly he may not lie down on it. Then isur zehu mechashash lihir hu aveira. The reason for the prohibition is it may lead to inappropriate thoughts. And what might occur because of those thoughts. Lachein isur yeshiva chal ala bal bilvad. So the prohibition is on the husband itself. Ulam isur shchiva chal gam ala isha. The woman cannot lie on his bed. But from the fact that the Darkei Tahara only specifies lying down on it, implies that she's allowed to sit on it. The wife may not lie down on the husband's bed if the Baal is at home. He might see that and have impure thoughts, but sitting on his bed is permitted according to this approach. And Rav Mordechai Eliyahu was in agreement with many Ashkenazi poskim, such as the Piskei Tshuva, according to whom it is forbidden for the wife to lie on her husband's bed if he's present. Even if sitting on the bed is permitted. Rav Ovadia Yosef adds that if he's not present, present means in the same room at the same time. Rav Eliyahu held present means being in the same house. So Rav Ovadia was more lenient, that if the husband is in the kitchen, in the same house, not in the same room, it would be more lenient than Rav Eliyahu says. The Taras Abayis says, he may not sit on her bed, even without her, even if she's not around. But what about his bed? The wife can lie on it as long as he's not present, meaning he's not in the same room. And according to Rav Eliyahu, means he's not in the same house. All of the sources we have seen are referring to a case where the husband and wife each have a bed that is designated as their own. What is the halacha when a couple alternates bed periodically? They don't have a specific bed. One time the husband sleeps in this bed, one time the wife sleeps in the same bed. They alternate. If that's the case, are the beds used during the time of need defined as theirs? According to David Levi, neither bed can truly be called, in that situation, the husband's bed or the wife's bed, in this case, as long as they switched before she became a nida. Avamita saroi shori, a temporary bed, is permitted. He says some people make a minhag to switch sleep when she's in her tahor period. They switch beds around. They don't sleep in the same bed. That would it would avoid all these prohibitions during the time of nida about whose bed they're sitting or lying down on. It's not considered a bed that's miyuchet to her. But if it's already been designated as their own, you can't all of a sudden sleep in a different bed during her nida period. The only time you can move around beds is during her tahara period. What about sitting together on the same surface, like on a bench? Are a husband and wife permitted to sit on the same surface, such as a bench or a couch, while she is in need, as long as they don't touch? The Mordechai as holding that it's forbidden. The Sefer Tzofnas Paneach Kosev B'Shem Rashi, she'asur leishev al kisei oruch. It's prohibited to sit on a long bench. Asher ishto nida yosheves alav. So this is already from the Rishonim prohibition. The Beis Yosef commentary on the Tur quotes this comment of the Mordechai, but writes that this position is not accepted as halacha. Nevertheless, the Ramah does accept it, but he limits it based on the Trumas Hadesha, another Rishon, to a surface that shakes, like one of those beds that swing, like a swinging bed, a swing couch or swing set, and is not affixed to the wall. He also notes that some permit sitting on such a surface when someone else is sitting in between. So the Ramah says the prohibition is only on a swinging bed, and he says that if somebody's sitting in between, the prohibition goes away. Also, leishev al safsal aruch shemitnadedet. You can't sit on a couch that swings. Ve'ena mechuberes lakosel. It's not connected to the wall. When his wife is sitting, who's a nida is on that. There are those that permit if there's an intervening person between them. Now, Rav Mordechai Eliyahu writes that Sfardim have accepted the position of the Ramah, and he gives two reasons for the prohibition. A husband is not allowed to sit on a swinging couch for two reasons. Lovers, those that are intimate with each other, this is a method of kiruv, of coming close. So you have to be concerned that it can lead to inappropriate thoughts. Agav to Suzara Sasa, with the moving of the bed. Yesh lachshot, that's one svara. Yesh lachshot shabsafsalim naded yavolim go'ablim mesim echad b'sheni. They might come into incidental or coincidental contact because the bed is moving, or excuse me, the couch is moving. So these are the two reasons. Rav Ovadia Yosef rules that Sephardi may sit on a swinging or moving bench because the Shulchan Aruch didn't accept this stringency. It was only the Ramah. Says Rav Ovadia in Taras Abayis, Yish Matirim Bezeh, there are those that are lenient. V'chein minhag Sephardim. Lahakil hashevet imishtonit al saf salechad, that husband and wife, and the wife is a neither, they can sit on one bench. Afilu imhim mitnadei ve'ena kavua. Even if the bed is a moving couch, uvachi zarush leiguza, but they shouldn't touch each other, even b'malbushem, even with their clothing. So even according to Ramah, and those who are machmir about moving benches, it seems clear that a couple may sit on heavy stationary benches, and that's clearly stated by Rav Vosner in the Shevet HaLevi. B'safsalim kvedim v'chazakim, very heavy benches, shori, it's permitted. Im yoshvim b'richuk zeh mizeh, as long as they're sitting apart. V'rak b'holchim l'tayel yesh oisur b'chol gav. He says they're going on a hike, or they're going on a walk, or some kind of outing, he prohibits even to sit on such a bed, even berichuk makom, because the setting is more intimate. Now, how do we apply this halacha to modern services? Does it apply to services such as a couch, or how about a car, like a bench seat in a car? Rav Shlomo Levi in the Shari Ora addresses this question and explains that as long as one does not cause the other to move when sitting on the same surface, it's permitted, since today's surfaces are usually relatively sturdy. Divrei Ramah odota isur lashevet al safsal echad, the prohibition of the Ramah to sit on one bench, nemru rak besafsal hamitnaded, with a moving couch. Dahainu sha'echad meizizet hasheni al yidei shivato al oto safsal. By you sitting there, you cause movement of the partner. Kayom ha'safot ein chazakot, but today the couches are very heavy. By sitting on a couch, you don't cause movement of the other person. They can sit on a couch as long as they're not close. Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, though, writes that when sitting on a couch or in the back seat of a car, one spouse will feel the movement of the other. Therefore, he suggests placing an object in between them when you sit in that manner. Lav davka safsal aser el kol kayotze bezeh. Kagon safaraka, a soft couch, or moshav acharei b'mechonit. He says very clearly, the back seat of a car. Shekasher yosheva echadu mezizat hasheni. It's such a soft thing that when you sit on it, it does cause the other person to move. Lachen kasher tzrichim lashevet al moshav, because if they have to sit like that, im ein chashash negia, if there's no chance that they're going to touch, kagon sheyesh chayfetz b'neim, they put a suitcase in between them or any object. In lachshosh l'kiruv das, that would be permissible. Mutar lehem lashavas l'moshav zeh. Rak she'akpidu, she says, are isha rishona. They should be makpid that when they get into the car, the woman should go in first. So it's not just chivalry that you open the door and you let your wife in first. It's Meker Adin to let the wife in. It's better if the husband would move the wife than the wife move the husband. It's more, men have more hirur than women. So by being moved by the wife getting into the car, it might be more problematic. The Ramah writes that one should be stringent not to go on a pleasure trip or outing together on a wagon or ship. They shouldn't go on a wagon together or on a boat. We're not talking about going on a long trip. We're talking about like on a local outing. Like you're taking one of those wagons in Central Park, taking, around the park or something intimate like that. But you're traveling from city to city. Mutter. That's permissible, even though they're alone. As long as they sit in a manner where they don't touch each other.
But he's talking about for business. I mean, he has the word for business is an English translation.
As opposed to
pleasure trip.
Because it says the Ramos says letzracha for his needs.
For business, yeah.
Okay. Medayik that perhaps the Ramos says it even from city to city. If it's a pleasure trip, it would be prohibited. Many Achronim, including the Shevet HaLevi, who hold that the stringency applies to Sfardim, assume here that the Ramah forbids all pleasure trips, even when sitting on a sturdy surface, and discuss which types of trips are included in this halacha nowadays. So we'll be more specific. Says the Shevet HaLevi, Bitul zeh, B'tiyul yesh lachmir, on an outing, one should be machmir. Then you should not use this leniency of putting an item in between them. Let's say you're sitting on the back seat of a car, where we said there might be a heter if you put something in between. So Rav Wazner says if you're on an outing, you shouldn't even do that. But if there's other people there, it's permitted. Let's say they're in the front seat, that would be okay. And if you put something in between the husband and wife, and there's somebody in the front seat, he says that would be a reason to be matir. Now, what's considered an outing? We have to be more machmir. Geter tilu kagon sheyotzim lirot biginot upardesim. You're going out to look at nature, look at gardens and orchards, uveharim, mountains, shemevi lidei kirva, that leads to closeness. V'chein nisiyah b'sira bayam, a private boat trip. We're not talking about getting on the Titanic, but on a private boat. Aval bikur krovim v'didim, but going to visit friends, on a nisiyah ba'ir shari, or other trips in the city is permitted. V'davka ke'in sfina v'agala asur. If it's a wagon or a boat, then it's prohibited. Ach ba'alicha beregel shari, but walking together is permitted. Aval kisholchim b'harim b'chadome. But if you're hiking in the mountains for, like a pleasure outing, they shouldn't even walk together. They shouldn't take a walk on a hike. It would be problematic when Rav Wozner. Darchei Tahara says, even they're not going to touch, we're concerned about closeness of thought. During those days, they should not go in a private car together on a trip. Even though they're sitting in different chairs, like in the front seat, each one has its own chair. It's not on the same bench. But l'chura, that's problematic. But if you have other people in the car, they're on a bus, they should sit in different seats. If they can't, they should put something separating them when they sit there. Churmos elu, these stringencies, af sheba avar nahagu bayam Ashkenazim bilvad, b'yameinu nahagu bayam gam Sfardim. Because the Ramah is the one who brought these stringencies, not the Shulchan Aruch, he says that in the past, it was only Ashkenazic couples that had these chumras. But he says today the Sfardim have accepted it as well. Tov lachmir, shalol tayelut boded, biginot barasim va'eli, shouldn't go walking in the botanical gardens and the orchards in these days. Afameinam yoshrim al safsal, even taking a walk is prohibited. Kidavar zemevi lekir v'chiba, v'lolavi lehir v'avera. So we see there's a lot of chumras regarding this. Now, from Rav Vaz and Rav Eliyahu, driving in a car together on a pleasure trip may be forbidden based on halacha. Rav Moshe Feinstein takes a different approach and writes in Igros Moshe that it is permitted if they sit in separate seats or are far apart. It would seem that they all would likely agree that if there's a choice, it's not recommended to initially plan a vacation alone together during a time that the woman will be nida. But if they have to go somewhere on a happenstance, then that's where Rav Moshe says it's permitted. Can the husband and wife go in the same car? Open machine.
Yeah.
The machine.
That's
right?
what Rav Moshe used to call a car, a machine. In this Igros Moshe.
Right. So hine ita b'ramah u'mashin adif misfina shel ramah tekavanosol sfina ktana shemitnaderet mitzad ha'isha. Remember, if you're on a boat, the woman gets in, so the woman's going to rock the boat. And we've learned today that that's the problematic issue if the woman causes movement to the man. A car is so heavy, a woman getting into the car is not going to cause that problem. And the husband would be moved in a small boat. The mashinu kasvina gdola shenanidun klal b'shvila yeshiva. He says a car is like a big boat that you're not going to cause movement of the other by you sitting there. V'imken yoter noter sheb'mashin afli tol afli tiyul yesh latir b'ofen shlo yuzeh b'zeh ayidei nadnud. He says if you're sitting in separate bucket seats, you could go on a tiyul as well in the same car without anybody in there. You could go on behu lifnim v'hi lachor. So he says if the husband's in front and the wife is in the back, as long as they're separate from each other, which I think would be in most of our cars today, they sit in separate seats. He says certainly if there's a third party in the car, it's certainly permissible. He says the whole issue of sitting on the same couch is a chumra ba'alma according to Tzurba M'Rabanan. So Rav Moshe gives us a good kula regarding couples traveling in the same car during the nida period, even for a tiyul. According to Rav Moshe, it would seem that the husband and wife may ride in a car together, except where they sit right next to each other in the back seat, where there may be concern of physical contact. The issue of sitting together in a car may arise if a couple is getting a ride with someone else and need to sit together in the back seat. Then you might have to put something in between, like we said, or we said it's not really a problem if there's somebody else in the car. Okay. What about histaklut, gazing at one's wife? Another one of the Harchakot focuses on histaklut. This prohibition of histaklut applies to a man gazing intently at other women, which we will have halachas and Even HaEzer about, which will come Mirz Hashem in the future. But certain aspects of this prohibition apply as well to a husband gazing at his wife when she's in nida. According to Rav Yosef and Reish Lakish, in the Gemara Nedarim, one may not gaze at parts of the body of one's wife that are usually concealed while she is in nida. Ravacha Rav Yoshia Oimer. This is in Masechta Nedorim Daf Chaf. Amud Aleph. Kol hatzoifa b'nashim. Whoever gazes at women, he's going to come to an avera. The kol hamistakel be'ikva shalisha, even at staring at her heel, having lo bonim she'enim muganim, will lead to him having children that are not good children. On Rav Yosef, uvi ishto nida. It also refers not just to a woman that's prohibited to him, like a shasish, right? But even his wife was a nida. On Rav Lakish, it means that the word heel is just a euphemism for her private area. Because if a woman sits sort of cross-legged, the heel sort of can touch that location. So that was the code word that the Gemara used for her private part. Rav Yosef Karo, in his commentary of the Beis Yosef on the Tur, and then eventually on the Shulchan Aruch, accepts this statement as the halacha and extends this ramification to all concealed areas of the body, not just the oso amoko. Lo yistakel be'ikv of lom kovas amachusos mimena, aval gav domer Reish Lakish hasam my ikva mokom atoyrev, kloimer sha'ekev machon keneged mokom atoyrev, mashma Rabbeinu, cholam machonat mechusim shabavu b'chol mokom atoyrev. Even though it seemed from the Gemara that it meant her private area, it means any area that's normally concealed. When we call makom mashma, the b'shar mekomod she'ein derech lechasotan, the places where she's not required to cover, mutar lehistakel bahen, so that you're allowed to gaze at. She's allowed to, put on makeup and to adorn herself, so that she doesn't look disgusting to her husband. The Mashakos of a Rambam, the Perek Chafal of Mehilchos Isori Bia, Mutar Adam Lahabit Ishto Nida. The Rambam says beferish, he's allowed to look at his wife. Alpha Pishihi Erva, even though it's prohibited at this time as an Erva. Alpha Pishihi Anos Levi Mena Beria, he has pleasure from looking at her. Hoil Vihi Muteris Lolachazman, since she's going to be permitted later on, Eina Bali de Michshol, it doesn't come to a problem. That, for example, that's not the case in a shasish, or someone that you're prohibited to. You would not be allowed to gaze at her. But the Rambam says, since the husband has permission to have relations with her later on, that's the reason why he permits the gazing. Says the Shulchan Aruch, that was the Beis Yosef, and the Shulchan Aruch codified it. Lo yistakel afilu be'ikvav lo mekomot ha'mechusot sheba. You may not gaze at these locations that I've covered, says the Ramah. Aval mutar listakel b'mekomot ha'gluim. Aval pi shenena b'riyasa. The Ramah clarifies we're allowed to stare at those areas that are uncovered. Rav Ovadia Yosef defines concealed areas as those areas where she would cover herself even when she is at home. But areas of the body that she only covers when leaving the house are not included. Right? These areas that are considered covered, any area of modesty that a woman normally covers. The prohibition is only those areas that a woman would cover. If a woman is going to cover those areas even when she's at home alone with her husband, those are the areas, says Rav Ovadia, that you're not allowed to stare at. But areas that the woman does not conceal from her husband in their home, except when she goes to the market, yesh lahakel. So based on this approach, Rav Ovadia is leaning concerning uncovered hair at home if one often does not cover her hair at home. If the woman is noyeg to walk around at home without her hair covered, then that's the area that can be looked at by her husband during the Yemei Nidusa. If the woman is normally going to unclothe her, walks around with her hair uncovered at home, and she only covers her hair when she goes outside, when there are no other mother present, mutar labayla listakel b'sei arosha af bizmani dasa. That's Rav Ovadia. Rav Tzvi Sobolovsky of YU seems to agree with this approach as well, based on a tshuva of Rav Moshe Feinstein, and applies it to wearing short sleeves at home as well as hair. Rav Moshe Feinstein in Igros Moshe 2.75 defines her covered places, parts of a woman that she usually covers in her house, even when no men other than her husband are present. This would not necessarily include her hair, if she usually does not cover her hair in the house. If she wears short sleeves in the house, she can continue to wear short sleeves while she's in Nida. However, if she does not normally wear short sleeves in the house, then she should not do so while she's in Nida. By contrast, Rav Vosner, Rav Mordechai Eliyahu are stringent with respect to hair as well, ruling that it should remain covered during the Nida period, even while at home. So you see again, Rav Moshe is more makel regarding that issue. What about other household activities that demonstrate affection? The laws of Harchakot include some activities that are routinely performed by a husband or wife at home, but contain a personal or intimate element. The Gemara in Ksubis lists 3 specific activities that fall in this category, as well as some examples of how the wives of the Amoraim performed them for their husbands while they were in a state of nida. For example, pouring a drink for him, making his bed, and washing his face. Any activities that a woman does for her husband, nida osa l'bayla. A nida can continue, for example, cooking for him, right? Chutz b'mziga sakos, except for pouring wine, hatzos hamita, or any kind of pouring beverages into his cup, making the bed, varchotzes ponav, yoda v'ragla, washing his face or his hands and feet. Well, that's obviously a minig that we don't have today. I think in most societies, most husbands, I think, wash their own face and feet and hands. But I guess that was in the time of Chazal, something that the wives used to do for their husbands. She may not make the bed while the husband is in the room. But if he's not in the room, she's allowed to make the bed. So the making the bed while the husband is there is going to stimulate hirhur, avera. So that's why it's prohibited. Umezika sakos, what Shmuel, the Amor Shmuel, machalfa leit visu b'yada desmala. His wife would make a change since she normally poured his cup with the right hand, if by switching it to the left hand, that's how Shmuel's wife did during the time of her nida. Abaya manchle apuma de kuva. Abaya would place the cup on top of the wine barrel, because they used to, drink wine where the wine was, and that she would place it down there, and he would get it from that location. Rava abisadia, he would actually put it on a pillow. Rav Papa Arsharshafa would put it on a bench. They would do some shinui in the Meziga Sakos in order to, during that period. Now, let's look at all of this in detail. The Shulchan Aruch codifies the halach of pouring in the following passage and explains that a cup may be poured in an unusual manner. Any kind of activities that a wife normally does for her husband, she may continue to do it as a nida, chutz b'mziga sakos, except for pouring into his cup. Shasur limzuk hakos, says the Ramah, b'fanav. That's if he's there, or to place it down in front of him, lanichol l'fanav al shulchan. Eli im kein tasa shum heker, unless she does it with a heker, with a change. Kagon shetanichero al shulchan biyad small. She should place it down on her left hand, or taniteno al akara al kesed, put it on a pillow. Afil biyad yamina. The poskim dispute which type of pouring is included in this prohibition. Does it apply specifically to the practice of preparing undiluted wine for drinking by dilution with water? In the times of the Chazal, the wine was very strong, and there was usually a 3-to-1 dilution with water. That was called mezika sakos. So they're saying, does the prohibition only include that type of activity? But maybe our wine today that you just pour out of the bottle without a dilution, would that be problematic? Does it apply to our simple contemporary practice of pouring commercially sold, already diluted wine into a cup, which is not as significant of an activity? According to Rav Avadia Yosef, Sephardim need only observe this rule in the case of diluting wine with water. Moreover, it applies only when she pours and places the cup upon the table. Therefore, it's permitted for her to prepare and serve standard wine, purchased in the store, and other drinks. In the Taras Abayis HaKatzar, Asur L'isha Nidin Lemzok L'bayla Kosh Shel Yain B'fanav L'anicha L'fanav Al Shulchan. She may not pour a cup of wine, place it in front. Elim Kein Tasa Shuni Ve'eker, unless she makes a shinui. K'god She'tanichen Al Shulchan B'yatzmo. V'yisr Mezigas HaKos, Eina Ela K'sha'osa Ken B'fnei Bayla. The pouring of the wine shouldn't be done in the presence of her husband. Aval Shalom B'fanav Mutter. But not in his presence, it's permitted. And when she places the cup in front of him on the table, if she did the dilution in the kitchen and then brought it on the table, that's permitted. If she does the dilution and puts it down in front of him, that's what's prohibited. Then, that's wine. She's doing a dilution with water. But to pour from the bottle directly without doing a water dilution, or she's going to pour orange juice or Coca-Cola, right? Those things she could add water to. Or pouring it from the bottle into the cup, mutter. Without a shinui. Even in the presence of the husband. The woman can bring him coffee, or milk, without a shinui. That's for Sfardim. Ashkenazim follow a more stricter understanding of this halacha, as explained by the Shach, that pouring any and drinking any drinks to the husband is forbidden, as well as serving solid food. Let's read these footnotes. So first of all, 12, the literal translation of the term shinui is change. Shinui is an important concept in halacha, particularly commonly with regards to Shabbos, and it refers to performing a certain act in an unusual way. In the case of Shabbos, a forbidden act may become less stringent if performed as shinui, as is no longer the proper formal transgression. In our case, it would seem that the primary advantage of performing tasks with a shinui is that it creates enough cognitive dissonance to forestall impulsive sexual behavior. The hecker sort of warns them to not have hero. Then, according to all opinions, there may be a problem with the husband giving his wife the Kiddush cup to drink from after the Friday night Kiddush, or even pouring wine from the Kiddush cup into a separate cup. Some of the methods suggested to avoid this problem include not placing the Kiddush cup directly in front of her and pouring wine into a few other cups and having her choose one herself. So that minhag that developed of having a small plate with multiple cups and then you pour it into those and then she chooses was not just a random, it's not just a random minhag. It's a minhag based on this halacha that she choose the cup for herself. What about making the bed, setting linens? We saw above that according to the Gemara, making the bed is another example of a household activity that may have intimate overtones and accordingly might lead to a forbidden relation. Nevertheless, Tosfos notes that not all arranging of bedding is considered intimate. Arranging the sheets is considered an act of affection, which Anita may not do for her husband. But arranging pillows and blankets on top of the sheets does not involve affection, and is permitted for Nida to do for her husband. That's according to Tosfos. Atzasa mita nira liri. That's Atzasa mita da'achainu frisa sadinim, the sheets. Shudavar shalchiba, aval atzas karim v'kistos, the pillows and the blankets. She'ein dvarim shalchiba shari lenida. The Shulchan Aruch accepts this distinction of Tosfos as halacha. Asur latzia mitasa b'fona. Dafka prifa sadinim v'machasa. We're talking about the sheet that covers the bed, the mattress. Shuder chiba. The pillows, the blankets, that's like a burden. That's not an act of affection, shori. If he's not in the room, everything is permitted, including the sheets. Even if he knows she's doing it at the time, it's just as long as he's not present, it's permitted. Shulchan Aruch writes that it's permitted for her to make the bed when he's not present. According to Darchei Tahara. And Shevet HaLevi, this means that he may not be present in the room at the time. According to Rav Yosef, he may be present in the room, but simply turn his head away from her, so he does not actually see her making the bed. So he could stay in the room. He just turns her head. Rav Yitzchak Mordechai Rubin writes in the Mara Kohen that this prohibition applies not only to a wife making her husband's bed, but also to a husband making a wife's bed. They didn't know that women's lib was coming, and that's or an egalitarian situation where sometimes the husbands makes the beds too. Although it would seem from these sources that a spouse may never arrange the sheets for the other, some poskim such as Rav Mordechai Eliyahu comment that in his opinion such an act is not considered an act of affection in the manner intended by Chazal if one is simply making the bed after waking up in the morning for it to look neat. So he says that when you wake up in the morning and you're making the bed, that's not a problem here. They were talking about like arranging the sheets prior to intimacy. So that's an issue. But making the bed at the end of the end of night for neatness sake, l'chora is not a problem. Washing the husband's face, hands, and legs. We saw above that the Gemara prohibits preparing water for washing parts of one's body without water, and that ruling is brought by the Shulchan Aruch. She can't pour the water for him to wash his hands and face or feet. Afilu eino gaspo. We're not talking about her washing it. She can't even pour the water for this. Afilu mayim tznon, even if it's cold water. The poskim debate the exact parameters of this prohibition. Some say this pertains only to pouring the water upon her husband, while others hold that it also applies to bringing him the water for these purposes. Rav Mordechai Eliyahu notes that although the dominant practice follows the lenient position, it's proper to be stringent. Rav Forst in Laws of Need also writes that many Achronim follow the stricter view, which is based on the Shach. Rav Hershel Schachter also holds stringently about this question. Laws of concepts of Nida, the wife should not turn the shower on for her husband, and she should not fill up a bathtub for her husband, or fill up a cup for Netilas Yadayim for her husband. It should be noted that this question was far more common in earlier times, when running water from a faucet was not available. In such cases, preparing or pouring water for bathing was considered a very important task. Today, though, this question does not arise so often, with the exception of where one of the spouses is seriously ill. One other application may be whether a wife may bring her husband a cup of water from the Netilas Yadayim, like at the Pesach Seder. We're talking about when she's a Nida, right? The minig normally for Urchatz is that the Netilas Yadayim cup is brought to him at the table. So this would be a problematic issue during the time when the Isha is a Nida, because of what we just learned, these halachos about bringing water for washing. What about this issue if one of the spouses is ill? Observing the halachot of Harchakot that pertain to physical contact becomes more complicated when the husband or wife is ill, requires assistance for all manners of basic tasks. May the spouse, who would otherwise be prohibited to do so during needed times, perform these tasks in light of the patient's specific need. Moreover, a person's libido is often diminished during illness. Is this grounds for leniency? Before answering these questions, it's necessary to address a more fundamental issue. What is the nature and level of severity of the ban on closeness and touch between a woman who's a nida and her husband? Are these harchakot an isser midoraisa or only an isser midrabbanan? The answer is that this question is subject to machlokas between the Rishonim. The Rambam writes in the Sefer HaMitzvos that the prohibition, which applies to all other women as well as one's wife when she's a nida, is biblical, while the Ramban argues that it's merely an isser midrabbanan. HaMitzvah shalosh me'os chamishim v'shalosh, the 353rd mitzvah, shizirinu mikrov la'achat mikol ela arayos afilu b'lo bia. You may not embrace or kiss or do other acts of closeness even without a sexual intercourse, bia. This looks like this is a znus issue, but it's midaraisa. It's kiruv that is prohibited, coming close, even without bia. So the Rambam says that these other harchakot fall under a derisidic ban. The Ramban, in the Hasagas HaRamban, so the Rambam wrote Sefer HaMitzvahs, where he details all 613 mitzvahs. The Ramban in the Milchamos so he argues with the Rambam on many of the status of the mitzvos, and these are called the Hasagas HaRamban. So he says Vinei Rav, referring to the Rambam, Motza Baraisa Zu Mufureshes. He found this Baraisa. The Told Dvar B'ilan Gadol. Therefore, he hung his hat on a big tree, is what he's saying. He has someone to rely on. Aval Kafia Ian B'Talmud Ein Adover came. If we look at the Gemara more carefully, Sheyeh B'Kirva Shein Bo Glui Erva, to just come close to another woman without the revealing of a place that should be covered, Lavu Malkus. He says it's not so that this would lead to Malkus, meaning it's only a rabbinic isser. According to the position of the Rambam, that the prohibition of intimate contact is midaraisa, would it be permitted for one spouse to help the other in this manner, helping them eat, taking their pulse, if there's a sakana nefashos? Although normally all Torah prohibitions are waived in case of pikuach nefesh, the Gemara in Sanhedrin famously declares that one may not engage in gilui arayos, forbidden sexual relationships, even at the cost of one's own life. So even though there's a pikuach nefesh aspect, you can't override it. They gathered and they voted in the attic of the house of Nitzeh in Lud, called Aver Shebetoira. Imonim lo'adam avor v'al taharog yavor v'al yarog. In all other lavim in the Torah, somebody says, do this lav, or I will kill you. Like, eat this piece of chazer, or I'll kill you. You're allowed to eat the piece of chazer. That's except if you do it publicly. If you do it publicly, it's going to lead to chilul Hashem, and even an avera, a lav, like eating chazer, would be prohibited, according to most opinions. But privately, if someone threatened you with your life, you'd be able to violate the law, except except for the three cardinal averas: sexual immorality, idolatry, or murder. Like someone says, you have to kill that Chaim Yankel, or I'm going to kill you. You have to allow yourself to be killed. Now, shortly thereafter, the Gemara indicates that this ban on forbidden relations was taken to great lengths. So it says even certain tertiary acts to these three sins, known as abizrayu, these are like the dusta, could also become forbidden even at the cost of a person's life. If so, then if negia is considered abizrayu of gilul arayos, if merely touching is considered this sort of fallout fallout of Gilui Arayos Abizrayu. Perhaps a spouse during the times of Nida would not be allowed to help their partner, even in case of Sakon and Nefashos. The Beis Yosef addresses this question, acknowledges that it is indeed a serious one, and leaves the issue unresolved. Says the Beis Yosef in the Tur, Kosov od b'trumas adeshim b'shem God lechad. The isha nida chola. If the wife is a chola, but she's a nida, ubayla roifet, her husband is a doctor, also lemashash la'adoifik, she can't take the pulse. The Gam b'trumas la Ramban, also lebal lemashesh tafak ishto nida. The Ramban says the same thing to check the pulse. Umiyam achoyle mesukan. But if the choyle is in danger, ve'en sham roifim, mashma k'tzas midvar of the shari. He says, it looks from his words that it might be permitted. He's following his own reasoning. Remember, we learned today the Ramban held that the Abizrayu of Arayas, these secondary issues, are only midrabanan. So therefore, Avalai Rambam, the Negias Erva, Asur min Torah, Hacha, Avapish Yesh Babikach Nefesh, Ershad also Mishum Davi of Abizrayu the Gilai Rice. And the Shulchan Aruch leaves it the tzarech iyun. He leaves it as he's not sure what the answer would be. Now the Shach rejects the stringent position of the Beis Yosef, arguing that a man may certainly check his wife's pulse when she's in a state of nida, because even according to Rambam, the prohibition applies only to affectionate behaviors, taking a pulse like kissing or embracing. Taking a pulse is not considered affectionate. He stresses, though, that such actions are forbidden if the illness is not a life-threatening one. Now, gentlemen, in today's world, we know that even sakonas, the suffix pikuach nefesh, is treated like pikuach nefesh. So, if a person has a mild headache, so that we know is not even a suffix pikuach nefesh. But if one is not sure, and even suffix pikuach nefesh would be treated as pikuach nefesh. When the Rambam said it's prohibited midoraisa, he said only embracing, kissing, things that lead to intimacy, which is not the case by a pulse. Jewish doctors check women's pulses. Afilu eishes ish, right? Even a woman who's an eishes ish, it's prohibited to him. Or nochris, or non-Jew, even though there are non-Jewish doctors. They do other examinations. It's not an act of chiba. If she's a sakana, if she's a chola, she'ein bo sakana, then it would be a problem. Okay. Any other comments, questions, aros?
It's a little hard to understand this last part because, I mean, I think it's at the Gemara that defines a chassid shota as someone who sees a woman drowning and won't rescue her because he doesn't want to touch her. I mean, that would
but
seem.
Yaakov, but that's clearly pikuach nefesh.
Yeah, but according to the Rambam, even pikuach nefesh would not be permitted because it's one of the three, as you said, cardinal sins.
But the Shach seems to qualify the Rambam derech chiba.
Clearly, it's not derech chiba, right? So according to the Shach, it's easier, but according to the Rambam, it's hard to understand that Gemara.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Very good.